Today, I'm going to be setting up a triple boot configuration with Windows and two other Linux distributions, specifically Ubuntu and Manjaro. The same process should work with any combination of Linux distributions, including more than two, but I went with Ubuntu and Manjaro because since these are from two different bases, you might want both of these installed if you need access to software from both the Debian base and the Arch base. So now, before I start, I just want to say that this video assumes that you already have Windows installed, and I'm not going over how to create installation media in this video, since I assume most of you watching this video know how to do that. In case you don't, I'll leave a link to a video covering how to do that up in the card. But anyways, let's start up my Ubuntu installation media and start building the ultimate triple boot configuration. Alright, so now I'm in Ubuntu installation media. So what I'm going to do is go into gparted. Okay, so now we've got our partitions here. So first thing we're going to do is shrink our Windows partition here. It'll be labeled basic data partition. It'll be the biggest NTFS partition here. So we're going to resize / move that. And I'm going to leave 412 megabytes preceding. And I'll explain why in a second. Then I'm going to divide this space in half. So 81 to 76 as my new size, and then that should populate on the free space following. Okay, so this looks good, so let's resize / move it. Okay, so now the reason why I left this 412 megabytes of an allocated space is because this EFI system partition, the default size for that with Windows, some Linux distributions don't like that. Like Manjaro would like it to be at least 300 megabytes, so that's why I did that. Now in order to be able to resize this, we have to remove this Microsoft Reserve partition out of the way. So let's resize / move that and drag that all the way to the other side. Okay, there we go. Now we can extend our EFI system partition. And don't worry if it leaves a little bit of an allocated space, we can actually correct that later. But for now, what we can do is go create our partitions. So first thing I like to do is create a swap partition. So I'm gonna make this about 2 gigs. I know it's gonna be a little bit larger than that because we're working in megabytes here. But I actually like to put this at the end of the space. So for our file system, we're going to select Linux swap here, because this is a swap partition, and add that. There we go. We now have our swap partition. And if you'd like, you can create a home partition. So I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to make that about 20 gigs and put that on the end of the space again, and format that with ext4 or whatever Linux file system you prefer. Like if you prefer Btrfs, you can do that. But anyway, let's add that. Okay, so now with the remaining space, I'm going to divide this evenly between my Ubuntu and Manjaro root partitions and format that as ext4. Same with our Manjaro partition, which is going to fill the rest of the space. Now our partition table should look something like this. We've got a larger fat EFI system partition, 3 new ext4 partitions, Ubuntu root, Manjaro root, home, that's optional, and Linux swap looks good. So now we've got to apply our changes to have it actually do stuff, and if you don't do that, then it won't actually do anything. But anyway, this will actually take a while, so I'll speed this up. Okay, so now it'll actually give you an error when growing the EFI system partition because gparted can't actually properly do that. But as long as it's showing increased capacity, you're pretty much good. And by the way, you can actually get rid of that little bit of unallocated space now. We can do that real quick. But anyway, it didn't actually apply our Linux partitions, so Let's go remake those quickly, shall we? There we go. Let's let this refresh just to make sure it got everything. Yes, it did. Okay, so now we can close out of gparted and start installing Ubuntu. I'm going to select English as my language, English US as my keyboard layout, and do a normal installation with the updates and drivers. And since we have specific partitioning needs, we're not going to select the install alongside option. Instead, we're going to go with something else and just do manual installation. It's going to load up our partitions real quick. So now, first of all, the partition that we're going to use as Ubuntu's root partition, which is this first ext4 partition here. We're going to double click on that and then select the same file system that we're already using and then set the mount point to slash. We don't need to format that since that's already been done by gparted. And then for our home partition, we need to double click on that, do the same thing, except we're going to mount this at /home. So now our configuration should look something like this. We're not formatting anything or doing anything with our Windows partition. And we're not touching this partition just yet since we're going to use that as the root partition for Manjaro. But anyway, let's install now and continue, and then set our time zone and our account and continue. And now it's gonna install Ubuntu. And the reason why I opted not to create these partitions with Ubuntu's installer is because I found that when I did do that, the installer would just crash right about now. Alright, so now that our Ubuntu installation is completed, we can restart now. And then once it prompts us to remove the installation medium, then we can go put in our Manjaro installation media and boot from that. Alright, and then once we're at the desktop, we're gonna launch the installer. Alright, and let's hit next, set our time zone and language and locale and our keyboard layout. Okay, now we're gonna select manual partitioning. So now we're gonna select our blank ext4 partition, double click on that, and then set our mount point for that to root. And then if you made a home partition, you have to set the mount point for that for /home. So your Ubuntu and Manjaro will share a home partition, and that allows for your files in your home folder to be shared between Ubuntu and Manjaro. Having a swap partition has a similar advantage in that your swap space is shared between Ubuntu and Manjaro. Note that this does not affect Windows because its file system works completely differently from Linux's, and Windows and Linux just work completely differently from each other all around. But anyway, if you're not sure which one you've installed Ubuntu on, it'll actually tell you right up here. We got this helpful color coding. You can see Ubuntu 22.04 LTS is installed on this partition. So we're not going to touch that, just our blank partition and our home partition. So now what we have to do for Manjaro is specify our EFI system partition. So we're going to mount that at /boot/EFI. Note that this is not applicable if you have a legacy BIOS, because in that case, you won't have an EFI system partition. But anyway, now this looks good, so we're going to hit next, and then set up our account on Manjaro. And note that for the home folder sharing to work, your username on Manjaro has to be the same as your username on Ubuntu. And we can use the same password for the administrator account. Just make sure that that's a strong password, and hit next. And optionally, we can install our Office suite of choice. I personally prefer LibreOffice, which is what Ubuntu ships with. So I'm going to grab that. And yep, this is what it's going to do. It's going to set up our EFI system partition with /boot/EFI. It's going to install Manjaro on this partition, this blank one, and set up our home partition as /home. Yep, that's exactly what we want to do, so let's click install. And install now. Alright, so now our Manjaro is finished installing, so let's restart now. And now we're in our grub menu. We've got Manjaro Linux here, and our Windows, and our Ubuntu. And you've got advanced options for Ubuntu and Manjaro. So we're done. Now, word of warning, if you want to remove one of these operating systems, it's not as simple as just deleting the partition. Like, you'll have to update your grub configuration, or even reinstall grub if the OS that you uninstalled was the one controlling your boot process, the way Manjaro does on this configuration. I've already made a video with instructions on how to do that, and I'll link it up in the card. But anyway, that's it for this video. Be sure to give it a like if you liked it, dislike if you disliked it, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and see you next time.